The evening shift was drawing to a close when Officer James Barrett's radio crackled to life. Another domestic disturbance call, his third that week. He sighed, running his hand through his graying hair as he steered his patrol car through the quiet streets of Millbrook. At 38, he'd seen enough troubled homes to last a lifetime, but something about this call felt different. The address led him to Cedar Grove, the rougher side of town where paint peeled from worn-down houses and chain-link fences told stories of better days. The Foster home stood out even here. A faded yellow two-story with broken shutters and an overgrown lawn scattered with forgotten toys. The front door creaked as Mrs. Henderson, the foster mother, welcomed him inside. The smell of old cigarettes and neglect hit him immediately. "They're just too much to handle," she whispered, gesturing upstairs. "I can't do this anymore." Her words slurred slightly, and Barrett noticed several empty wine bottles by the kitchen trash. As he climbed the stairs, he heard whispers and shuffling. The first bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, he saw them. 6 pairs of eyes watching him cautiously. The oldest girl stood protectively in front of her sisters, her chin raised with a dignity that broke his heart. "It's okay," he said softly, pushing the door open wider. "I'm just here to check on everyone." The room was small for 6 girls, with 3 sets of bunk beds crammed against the walls. School backpacks were neatly lined up despite the chaos around them, and handmade drawings brightened the peeling wallpaper. The oldest girl spoke first. "We're fine, officer. We don't need any help." But her eyes told a different story, and Barrett noticed how the little one, barely 4 years old, clung to her sister's leg, thumb firmly in mouth. Barrett sat down on the floor, making himself less threatening. "I'm Officer Barrett, but you can call me James. Would you mind telling me your names?" One by one, they introduced themselves, their voices growing slightly stronger with each introduction. As they talked, Barrett learned their story. 6 sisters, kept together through 3 foster homes in 2 years. The oldest had basically raised her siblings, making sure homework was done, hair was braided, and everyone had something to eat, even if it meant she went without. When the youngest sister's stomach growled audibly, Barrett asked when they'd last eaten. The silence that followed was deafening. Without a word, he stepped out and returned with fresh sandwiches from his car's emergency stash, a habit he developed over years of meeting hungry kids on patrol. Watching them eat, something shifted inside him. Maybe it was the way the oldest made sure everyone else got their share before taking her own. Maybe it was how the twins unconsciously mirrored each other's movements, or how the little one finally smiled when he made a silly face at her. Before leaving that night, Barrett made some calls. He couldn't shake the feeling that these girls needed more than another temporary placement. Standing in his living room later, he looked around his empty house. The house he bought years ago, dreaming of a family that never happened after his fiancée left. His decision shocked everyone, including himself. But as he filed the emergency foster care paperwork, Barrett knew deep down it was right. These girls didn't need another system failure. They needed a home. That night changed 6 lives, and his own. What started as a routine call became the moment Officer James Barrett chose to become more than just another uniform passing through their lives. He chose to become the father they never had, even though he had no idea how to raise one child, let alone 6 black daughters in a small town that wasn't ready for such a family. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of their story. A story that would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, love, and what it means to protect and serve. Moving day was chaos wrapped in hope and sprinkled with fear. Barrett's modest 3-bedroom house had never seen so much activity. He'd spent the previous weekend clearing out his home office and spare room, making space for bunk beds and dressers he bought secondhand. The girls arrived with their belongings in garbage bags. Everything they owned could fit in those few plastic sacks, and that fact alone made his heart ache. The neighborhood watch committee didn't waste any time. Within hours, curious faces peeked through curtains, and phones buzzed with messages. "Did you see?" they whispered. "That white cop on Pine Street took in those 6 black girls." Some meant well, others didn't, but Barrett was too busy learning how to be a dad to care about the gossip. That first night was a crash course in parenting. The youngest, barely 4, cried for hours because she couldn't find her stuffed rabbit, the only toy she'd managed to keep through all their moves. Barrett turned the house upside down until he found it stuck behind a dresser. When he handed it to her, her tiny arms wrapped around his neck in her first real hug, and he had to fight back tears. The twins claimed the top bunks immediately, their matching grins the first genuine smiles he'd seen from them. But the oldest sister stayed cautious, keeping her sisters close, watching Barrett's every move. She'd been their protector for so long, it was hard for her to trust anyone else with that job. Breakfast the next morning was an adventure. Barrett had never cooked for 7 people before. His attempt at pancakes left the kitchen looking like a flour bomb had exploded, but the sound of giggling filled the house as the girls watched him struggle. The 8-year-old even offered to help, showing him how they liked their pancakes shaped like hearts. The real challenge came when the 6-year-old needed her hair done for school. Barrett's fingers, so capable with handcuffs and firearms, fumbled hopelessly with hair ties and braids. That night, he stayed up late watching YouTube tutorials about black hair care, determined to learn. His fellow officers found him the next day at the station, practicing braiding on a doll he'd bought specially for learning. Shopping for school supplies turned into an emotional roller coaster. The girls had never been allowed to pick out their own backpacks before. When Barrett told them they could choose any style they wanted, their faces lit up like Christmas morning. The cashier's judgmental stare bounced right off him as he watched his daughters clutch their new bags with pride. But not everything was heartwarming moments and small victories. The 11-year-old twins got into a fight at school when someone made a comment about their fake white dad. Barrett had to leave work early to pick them up, finding them in the principal's office, angry and hurt. That evening, they had their first family meeting, sitting in a circle on a living room floor, talking honestly about their feelings and fears. The community's reaction was mixed. His next-door neighbor, an elderly woman who'd lived there for 40 years, surprised everyone by showing up with 6 hand-knitted scarves and a casserole. But others weren't so welcoming. Barrett overheard whispers at the supermarket, caught disapproving looks at church, and noticed how some parents pulled their kids away at the park. Every night, after finally getting everyone to bed, a process that involved multiple stories, several glasses of water, and countless "just one more minute, please," Barrett would sit on his back porch and wonder if he was in over his head. But then he'd remember the sound of laughter now filling his once quiet house, or how the little one had started calling him Daddy when she was half asleep, and he knew he'd never go back to his old life. Learning to be a family wasn't easy. 6 different personalities, 6 different needs, 6 different ways of processing trauma, and one rookie dad trying his best to keep up. But somehow, in between the chaos of morning routines and bedtime struggles, something beautiful was beginning to grow. They were no longer just 6 girls and a cop. They were becoming something more. They were becoming a family. Time has a funny way of changing things. After 6 months under the same roof, the old house on Pine Street had transformed. Where silence once lived, now laughter echoed through the halls. Barrett's garage had become a construction zone as he worked weekends, converting it into 2 cozy bedrooms, determined to give his girls more space to call their own. The oldest daughter's wall finally started coming down the day Barrett showed up at her school debate team tryouts. She'd mentioned it casually at breakfast, not expecting anything. But there he was, still in his police uniform, sitting in the back of the room. She stumbled over her words when she first spotted him, then drew strength from his encouraging smile and delivered her argument with such passion that even the debate coach was impressed. That evening, while helping her practice for future debates, Barrett learned why it meant so much. None of her previous foster parents had ever shown up for anything. Not for parent-teacher conferences, Not for performances, not even for birthdays. But you came, she whispered, her voice catching slightly. You actually came. The twins found their place too. After catching them racing each other around the backyard one afternoon, Barrett signed them up for track and field. They were naturals, their matching ponytails flying behind them as they ran. He never missed a meet, cheering so loudly that the other parents couldn't help but smile at the enthusiastic police officer with his stopwatch and camera. The 8-year-old discovered her love for science when Barrett helped her build a volcano for the school fair. What started as a simple project turned into weekly father-daughter experiments in the kitchen. Sure, they made messes, lots of them. But seeing her eyes light up with each successful experiment was worth all the cleanup. Even Barrett surprised himself with new skills. His YouTube hair braiding sessions had paid off. Every morning, he'd sit patiently, working through each girl's hair while they told him about their dreams from the night before or their plans for the day. These quiet morning moments became sacred, a time when barriers seemed to melt away completely. The 6-year-old, who used to hide behind her sisters whenever Barrett came near, now ran to the door every evening when she heard his patrol car pull up. Daddy's home, she'd announced to the whole house, as if anyone could have missed her excitement. Her drawings of their family, stick figures of different colors holding hands, covered the refrigerator door. The youngest had gone from barely speaking to chattering nonstop. She'd follow Barrett around the house, telling him elaborate stories about her stuffed animals or the clouds she'd seen that day. He'd listen intently, asking questions that made her beam with importance. Sometimes she'd fall asleep in his lap during family movie nights, and he'd sit there long after the movie ended, not wanting to disturb her peaceful rest. Learning about each other's cultures became a family adventure. Barrett started celebrating Kwanzaa alongside Christmas, learning the traditions alongside his daughters. They helped him understand the importance of their heritage, and he made sure their home reflected both their backgrounds. Books about Black history lined their shelves, and artwork celebrating their culture decorated the walls. One Sunday morning, Barrett walked into church with all 6 girls, dressed in their best. The same people who had whispered and stared months ago now smiled and waved. His oldest daughter noticed the change. "They're finally seeing what we already know," she said, squeezing his hand. "That family doesn't have to match to fit perfectly." The transformation wasn't just in the house or the girls. Barrett had changed too. His fellow officers noticed how he'd softened around the edges while somehow becoming stronger at his core. He handled difficult situations at work with new understanding, especially when it came to families in crisis. He'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your heart and let love do the rest. Their nightly routine now ended with real hugs instead of hesitant goodnights. "Love you, Dad," they'd say, each in their own way, some loud and cheerful, others quiet but just as sincere. And every time, Barrett's heart would swell with gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought these 6 amazing girls into his life. The barriers hadn't just broken down. They'd been replaced by bridges, connecting hearts that once seemed worlds apart. Not everyone in Millbrook believed in fairy tales. Despite the progress Barrett and his daughters had made as a family, some people seemed determined to rain on their parade. The whispers that had started months ago hadn't completely died down. They'd just gotten louder and meaner. It started small. At the grocery store, an elderly couple shook their heads disapprovingly when they saw Barrett helping his youngest daughter reach the cereal box she wanted. "It's just not natural," the woman muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Barrett pretended not to notice, but his oldest daughter's shoulders tensed up, and the little one's smile faded. The PTA meeting became a battlefield of subtle jabs and cold shoulders. When Barrett volunteered to help with the school carnival, several parents suddenly had concerns about his involvement. One mom even suggested that perhaps his situation might make other families uncomfortable. Barrett kept his cool, though his hands were clenched under the table. The twins faced their own battles at school. During track practice, They overheard some parents questioning whether they had an unfair advantage in sports. The coach, thankfully, shut that down quickly, but the girls came home quieter than usual that day. That night, Barrett stayed up late, holding them as they finally let their tears fall. Even at the police station, not everyone understood. His partner of 5 years started making excuses not to come over for their usual Sunday football watches. Other officers would go quiet when he entered the break room, their conversations about his crazy decision still hanging in the air. One rookie even had the nerve to ask if he was trying to make some kind of statement. The hardest hit came when the 8-year-old's birthday party invitations were met with a wave of "sorry, we're busy that day" responses. She tried to pretend it didn't matter, but Barrett found her crying in her room, clutching the stack of unused invitations. That weekend, he threw her the biggest celebration she'd ever had, with her sisters making all the decorations and his elderly neighbor bringing enough cupcakes to feed an army. But for every person who turned away, someone else stepped forward. The local librarian, an older black woman, began saving books about diverse families for them. She'd smile warmly whenever they came in, showing the girls stories about families that looked like theirs. "Love makes a family," she'd say. "Nothing else matters." Barrett found himself having difficult conversations with his daughters about race and privilege. He listened more than he spoke, learning from their experiences. When the 60-year-old asked why some people didn't like their family, he struggled to find the right words. Sometimes, he finally said, "People are scared of things they don't understand. But that's their problem, not ours." One day, after a particularly rough week of sideways glances and whispered comments, Barrett's police chief called him into the office. He braced himself for another lecture about maintaining professional distance. Instead, the chief shared a story about his own adopted sister and how his parents had faced similar resistance in the 1970s. "Stand your ground," the chief advised. "You're doing something important here." The oldest daughter, wise beyond her years, started a blog about their family life. Her honest, heartfelt posts about their daily adventures and challenges began attracting attention. Local parents reached out, saying her words had opened their eyes. Slowly, play dates and birthday party invitations started coming in. The turning point came during a town council meeting, when someone suggested that non-traditional families might be changing the character of the neighborhood. Barrett's youngest daughter, who had tagged along because the babysitter canceled, stood up. In her clear, innocent voice, she asked, "Why can't love be the only thing that matters?" The room fell silent. Then his elderly neighbor stood up, then the librarian, then the track coach, and finally the police chief. One by one, they shared stories about how Barrett and his girls had touched their lives, changed their perspectives, and made their community richer. That night, as Barrett tucked his daughters into bed, the oldest one said something that made all the struggle worthwhile. "Dad, maybe we're not just a family. Maybe we're showing people what a family can be." He hugged her tight, knowing that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of love. 18 months can change everything. Barrett sat at his kitchen table one quiet morning, coffee getting cold as he stared at the stack of adoption papers in front of him. The house was still asleep, that rare peaceful moment before 6 different alarms would start ringing. Photos covered his walls now: birthday parties, track meets, science fairs, and countless silly moments that made up their daily life. He'd been their foster father for a year and a half, but in his heart, they'd been his daughters for much longer. The decision to adopt wasn't really a decision at all. It felt more like finally putting words to what they all already knew. Still, his hand shook slightly as he picked up his pen. The girls found out during Saturday morning pancakes, their family tradition. Barrett had gotten pretty good at making them now, even mastering the chocolate chip smiley faces that the youngest insisted on. "I want to ask you all something important," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. 6 pairs of eyes looked up at him. Forks paused mid-bite. When he explained about adoption, about making their family official forever, the youngest jumped up so fast she knocked over her juice. The twins grabbed each other's hands, their identical smiles lighting up the room. The 8-year-old started crying happy tears into her pancakes. But it was the oldest who moved him most. She stood up quietly, walked around the table, and hugged him tight. "What took you so long?" she whispered. Word spread through town like wildfire. His partner at the police station was the first to step up, offering to be a character witness for the adoption proceedings. "You're already a better father than most," he said gruffly, trying to hide his emotion. "Those girls hit the jackpot with you." The church ladies who had once whispered behind their hands now organized a fundraiser to help with adoption costs. His elderly neighbor showed up with 6 hand-sewn quilts, one for each girl, with their names carefully stitched in the corners. "Every child needs something made just for them," she said simply. But not everyone celebrated. A distant relative of the girls tried to challenge the adoption, arguing that the children should be with a black family. The stress of those few weeks showed on everyone's faces. The oldest stopped sleeping, worried they'd be separated. The twins' grades slipped. Even the little one stopped singing her usual morning songs. During the home study, Barrett watched nervously as the social worker interviewed each girl separately. He prepared them to be honest, to say whatever they felt. Hours later, the social worker sat him down, tears in her eyes. "Those girls," she said, "they all said the same thing, that for the first time in their lives, they feel safe, loved, and proud of who they are." Support came from unexpected places. The local Black Pastors Alliance, after meeting with Barrett and the girls, stood firmly behind the adoption. "Love doesn't see color," the head pastor announced during a community meeting. "But this man sees his daughters, their beauty, their heritage, their hearts. That's what matters." The morning of the court date, Barrett found all 6 girls in his room before dawn. Without a word, they piled onto his bed like they used to during thunderstorms, a tangle of pajamas and nervous energy. "No matter what happens today," the oldest said, speaking for all of them, "you're our dad." The courtroom was packed. His fellow officers came in uniform, standing at attention when the family entered. The girls' teachers took personal days to be there. Even the grumpy court clerk was smiling. When the judge asked each girl if she wanted to be adopted, 6 strong voices said yes, one after another. The judge's gavel came down, making it official, but Barrett barely heard it over the pounding of his heart. Looking at his daughters, officially, legally, forever his daughters, he saw their future stretch out bright and beautiful before them. The oldest was already talking about college, the twins had their sights set on the Olympics, the 8-year-old wanted to be a scientist, and the younger ones were just happy to be loved. That evening, they had a backyard party. The whole neighborhood showed up, even those who'd once doubted them. Under string lights and stars, watching his girls dance and laugh with their friends, Barrett realized they hadn't just built a family. They'd helped build a community that was learning to see with their hearts instead of their eyes. Time flew by like pages in a wind-blown book. The quiet house Barrett once knew had transformed into a bustling hub of teenage drama, preteen excitement, and the endless energy of growing children. Each day brought new challenges that no police academy training could have prepared him for. The oldest daughter's college applications spread across the dining room table like a paper battlefield. Every evening, after his shift, Barrett would sit with her, reviewing essays and helping her dream big. When the acceptance letter from her dream university arrived, her scream of joy brought everyone running. She'd hugged Barrett so tight he could barely breathe, whispering "thank you for believing in me" through happy tears. But life wasn't all celebrations. One of the twins started withdrawing, her usual spark dimming. Barrett noticed how she'd skip meals and spend hours alone in her room. His heart broke when he overheard her crying one night. It took weeks of gentle conversations and finally a visit to a caring therapist before she opened up about feeling like she was living in her twin's shadow on the track team. Together, they worked through it. Barrett helped her discover her own passion for photography, turning their basement into a darkroom where she could develop her own pictures. Watching her confidence bloom again as she captured life through her lens became one of his greatest joys. The 8-year-old, now 11, stumbled into identity questions that tested Barrett's parenting skills. "Why can't I have straight hair like the girls in my class?" she asked one morning, frustrated with her beautiful curls. That weekend, Barrett invited successful black women from their community to share their stories over dinner. They talked about self-love, culture, and the importance of embracing their natural beauty. Slowly, she began to see herself through new eyes. The twins' athletic success brought its own challenges. When they broke the school's track records, some parents whispered about natural advantages. Barrett wanted to confront them, but his girls showed more maturity than the adults. "We'll just keep winning," they said, turning prejudice into motivation. And when they did, their trophy shelf growing fuller by the month. The little artist, now 9, surprised everyone with her talent. Her art teacher called Barrett in for a meeting, not to discuss problems, but to show him a portfolio of work that left him speechless. Her paintings told stories of their family, 6 different shades of brown hands holding onto larger pale ones, all connected by love. One piece even made it to the State Youth Art Exhibition. The youngest, growing up too fast for Barrett's liking, developed a knack for bringing strays home, both animals and people. She'd invite classmates who needed a safe place for dinner, somehow knowing which kids needed extra care. "You taught us family is about love," she'd say when Barrett asked about her latest dinner guest. "I'm just sharing ours." Homework time became a family affair around their expanded kitchen table. Barrett learned more about algebra and world history than he ever did in school. Sometimes he'd catch himself just watching them, heads bent over books, sharing pencils and encouragement, helping each other understand difficult concepts. These quiet moments reminded him how far they'd come. The house adapted to their growing needs. The garage bedrooms got redecorated as tastes changed. Soccer posters replaced princess themes, and bulletin boards filled with track ribbons and art show flyers covered the walls. Barrett's police badges and family photos shared space with school certificates and candid snapshots of their life together. One evening, after a particularly chaotic day of dress shopping for the winter formal, driver's ed anxiety, middle school drama, and elementary school project panic, Barrett collapsed onto his favorite chair. The house was finally quiet, but evidence of his daughter's presence was everywhere. Half-finished art projects, running shoes by the door, college brochures on the coffee table, and a handmade, world's best dad mug still warm from his evening coffee. His police partner stopped by and found him grinning at the beautiful mess. "Rough day?" he asked. Barrett shook his head. "Just living the dream, partner. Just living the dream." And he meant it, every chaotic, wonderful bit of it. The growing pains were real, but they were growing together, and that made all the difference. Learning about Black culture became a family adventure that transformed their home into a vibrant celebration of heritage and love. Barrett knew that loving his daughters meant embracing their culture completely, not just on the surface. He wanted them to grow up proud of who they were, connected to their roots while building their own unique family traditions. It started in the kitchen. Every Sunday, they'd try recipes from Black cookbooks, filling their home with new spices and flavors. The girls taught Barrett family recipes they remembered from their grandmother, recipes that had been passed down through generations. His first attempt at sweet potato pie was a disaster that had everyone laughing, but by the 5th try, even their elderly neighbor asked for the recipe. Their living room became a learning space. Barrett filled their bookshelves with works by Black authors, from children's books to powerful memoirs. Family reading time turned into deep discussions about history, culture, and identity. The oldest daughter found her voice through these conversations, eventually starting a Black literature club at her high school. Hair care became a sacred ritual. After mastering the basics, Barrett sought help from black mothers in their community who became like aunties to his girls. They taught him about protective styles, deep conditioning, and the cultural significance of black hair care. Sunday evenings became their special time, with music playing as they did each other's hair, sharing stories and dreams. The walls of their home told new stories too. Barrett worked with his daughters to create an art wall featuring black artists and historical figures. The youngest grabbed her crayons and added her own drawings. Beautiful brown faces with bright smiles. "That's our family," she'd proudly tell visitors, pointing to her artwork. Holidays took on new meaning. They celebrated Kwanzaa alongside Christmas, with Barrett learning the principles alongside his daughters. The girls taught him about each day's significance, lighting the kinara together and sharing stories about their heritage. During Black History Month, they hosted dinner parties where each daughter presented about a different historical figure who inspired them. Music filled their home with soul. The twins introduced Barrett to artists he'd never heard before, and soon their car rides became rolling concerts. He learned the lyrics to their favorite songs, even if his singing made them cover their ears and laugh. More importantly, he learned the stories behind the music, the history, the struggle, and the triumph. Their community involvement deepened. Barrett joined the local Black Parents Association, not to leave but to learn. He sat quietly in meetings, listening to concerns and experiences different from his own. Other parents, who had once been skeptical, began to see his genuine commitment to raising his daughters with strong cultural awareness. The 8-year-old school project about family heritage became a turning point. Initially nervous about standing up in class, she proudly shared both sides of her story, her Black heritage and her adoptive father's commitment to nurturing it. Her presentation moved her teacher to tears and opened up important conversations about diverse families. Cultural celebrations became neighborhood events. Their backyard hosted Juneteenth barbecues where Barrett grilled while community elders shared stories with the younger generation. These gatherings grew larger each year, bringing together families of all backgrounds who learned and celebrated together. The girls' birth culture wasn't just acknowledged, it was lived daily. When the youngest had questions about her skin color being different from her dad's, Barrett took her to a Black-owned bookstore where they found books about families like theirs. The store owner, a kind woman with silver hair, shared her own stories of raising children in a world that sometimes struggled to understand diverse families. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, the oldest daughter told Barrett something that made his heart swell. "You didn't just give us a home, Dad. You helped us keep who we are while showing us who we could become." The other girls nodded in agreement, and Barrett realized that in learning about their culture, he hadn't just become a better father, he'd become a better human being. Their family had built a bridge between two worlds, showing their community that love doesn't erase differences, it celebrates them. In their home, culture wasn't just learned, it was lived, breathed, and passed on, creating a legacy of understanding that reached far beyond their front door. The changes in Millbrook started small, like ripples in a pond after a single stone drops. What began as one officer's decision to open his heart grew into something that touched the entire community. Their family story became a catalyst for change, inspiring others to think differently about love, family, and acceptance. The oldest daughter's diversity council at the high school started with just 5 members meeting during lunch breaks. But her passionate leadership and personal story drew others in. Soon, they were organizing cultural awareness events that packed the school auditorium. Teachers noticed fewer incidents of bullying, and students from different backgrounds started sitting together at lunch. Barrett's example influenced his fellow officers too. The same police station that once buzzed with skeptical whispers now had a monthly community outreach program. Officers started volunteering at the local youth center, building bridges with families they used to only meet during emergencies. Barrett's partner even became a mentor to 3 teens from struggling homes. The twins' success on the track team changed more than just school records. Their dedication inspired younger athletes, especially girls of color, who'd never seen themselves represented in the school's trophy case before. The athletics department started a mentorship program, pairing senior athletes with middle school students. The twins took their roles as mentors seriously, showing up early to help their mentees practice. Word spread beyond their small town. A local newspaper article about their family caught the attention of adoption agencies in neighboring cities. They invited Barrett to speak at foster parent training sessions, where his honest stories about challenges and triumphs helped prepare other families for transracial adoption. "It's not always easy," he'd tell them, "but love learns and grows if you let it." Their home became a safe haven for other foster children in the community. The youngest would often invite classmates over for dinner, somehow knowing which kids needed extra care. Barrett found himself hosting impromptu pizza parties for kids waiting for placement, his daughters helping them feel less scared about their uncertain futures. The 8-year-old's science fair project about genetic diversity won first place, but more importantly, it started conversations. Parents who attended the fair found themselves learning alongside their children about how differences make humanity stronger. Her simple explanation of why families don't need to match physically to match in their hearts touched even the most traditional minds. Support groups started forming naturally. Other adoptive families reached out, and soon their living room hosted monthly meetings where parents and kids could share experiences. The little ones would play upstairs while teenagers talked about their unique challenges, and parents exchanged advice and encouragement. These gatherings became a place where everyone could be completely honest about their struggles and celebrations. The local church, once a place of whispered judgments, transformed into a center for community unity. Barrett's family inspired the creation of a family ministry that specifically welcomed non-traditional families. Holiday celebrations became more inclusive, with their Kwanzaa celebration drawing curious participants from all backgrounds. Even the town's annual festivals changed. The cultural fair, which used to feature the same handful of displays each year, bloomed into a vibrant celebration of diverse families and traditions. Barrett's daughters helped organize a section called Love Makes a Family, where adoptive families could share their stories and connect with others. Local businesses started changing too. The old bookstore downtown added an entire section dedicated to diverse families and cultural education. The owner proudly displayed photos from their community events, including one of Barrett attempting to braid his youngest daughter's hair at a father-daughter workshop he helped organize. One day, while grabbing coffee at the local diner, Barrett overheard 2 elderly women talking about a new foster family in town. Instead of the criticism he'd faced years ago, he heard them discussing ways to welcome the family and offer support. "Remember Barrett's girls," one said. "Look how beautiful that turned out. We should bring them a casserole, like Mrs. Wilson did for them." The police chief summed it up best during a community meeting. "Sometimes it takes one family's courage to show us all what's possible." Looking around at the changes in their town, the new programs, the shifting attitudes, the growing acceptance, Barrett realized their family hadn't just adapted to their community. They'd helped their community adapt to a bigger, more beautiful vision of what family could be. 5 years had passed since that life-changing night when Barrett first met his daughters. Standing in their backyard, surrounded by graduation decorations and proud family members, he could hardly believe how far they'd come. The oldest daughter, now headed to college on a full scholarship, stood tall in her blue graduation gown, her valedictorian medals glinting in the sunlight. Her graduation speech had left the entire auditorium in tears. She spoke about family being a choice made every day, about a police officer who became a father to 6 girls who needed love more than they needed anything else. In the audience, Barrett sat with his other daughters, all of them beaming with pride as their big sister described their journey. The twins had become local legends in their own right. Their track records still stood unbeaten, and college scouts were already making visits even though they were only juniors. But more important than their athletic achievements was the youth running club they'd started, teaching younger kids that determination matters more than natural talent. The former 8-year-old, now 13, had discovered a gift for science that amazed her teachers. Her bedroom looked like a junior laboratory, filled with experiments and research projects. She'd already won 3 state science fairs, but Barrett was most proud of how she always made time to tutor struggling classmates. The little artist's work now hung in City Hall. A massive mural she painted with other young artists, showing hands of different colors joined together in unity. She'd become the youngest member of the town's Arts Council, proving that age was no barrier to making a difference in the community. And the youngest, still full of sunshine and hope, had started a friendship lunch club at her elementary school where no kid ever had to eat alone. She had her father's heart for helping others, and her simple kindness touched everyone she met. Their home had become more than just a house. It was a landmark of love. New families in town often found their way to their door, seeking advice or just reassurance that different could be beautiful. The front porch, where Barrett had once sat alone wondering if he was in over his head, now hosted regular gatherings where laughter and acceptance flowed freely. Barrett himself had changed in ways he never expected. His fellow officers joked that he'd gone soft, but they said it with respect, knowing his experience had made him a better cop. He handled family cases with special care, understanding now that sometimes people just need someone to believe in them. The memory box in the living room told their story through photographs. First days of school, sports victories, dance recitals, and countless ordinary moments that had become extraordinary through love. Each picture showed not just what they'd gained, but what they'd given to their community: hope, courage, and a new way of seeing family. One evening, as the family sat around their expanded dinner table, they needed a bigger one as their extended family grew. The oldest daughter made an announcement. She'd been accepted into law school, inspired by her father's dedication to justice and her own experience with adoption. "I want to help other kids find their forever families," she said, her eyes shining. The town magazine did a follow-up story on their family, titled Love's Ripple Effect. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about dozens of other families who'd found courage in their story. About a community that had learned to see with their hearts instead of their eyes. About a small town in America that had become a model of what acceptance could look like. That night, after the graduation party wound down and the younger girls were in bed, Barrett sat with his oldest daughter on their porch swing. "Did you ever think," she asked, "that one decision would change so many lives?" Barrett looked at the stars, thinking about that night 5 years ago when he'd followed his heart instead of convention. "Sometimes," he replied, "the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. We just have to be brave enough to make them." Their story had become more than just a tale of adoption. It was a testament to the power of love to bridge any gap, heal any wound, and create beauty from life's unexpected turns. In choosing each other, they hadn't just built a family, they'd helped build a world where love knows no boundaries and family means so much more than matching faces in a photo frame.